Hey, this is Michelle. How's it going? So this episode is late, and I just want to explain why. Basically, there's been a combination of technical factors which has resulted in me and Ashleigh screaming at percentage bars as we try to send files to each other on an internet that will not submit to our will. But also, it's not been a particularly great time for me mental health-wise. I've been starting a bunch of jobs, and it's been getting a bit on top of me, so I want to apologise for that. Don't worry, I'm fine. It's all good. It's just all been a bit much. But I also want to put out something that's been happening on our social medias. There's been a fair bit of anti-non-binary sentiment on our social media accounts from trans men and trans women. And I just want to say to those people, this is not the show for you. We don't want you here. Like, me and Ashleigh both believe that it is not non-binary people that are causing the problems in the community. It is you. And I would actively encourage you to go and listen to non-binary people, go learn about non-binary people, and to get your head out of your ass. And if that's not something you're willing to do, then fuck off. You are not welcome here. You're not welcome on our social media accounts. Obviously, we can't stop you from listening if you really want to, but I just want to make it absolutely clear right now. Fuck off if you don't accept non-binary people. Thanks for listening, and to everybody else, non-binary, trans, all of the various identities, intersex, all of the good people out there, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thank you for sticking with us.
The category is What the Trans, darlings?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans?
What the trans, indeed. Ashleigh, what's going on? How are you?
How is life? Well, yeah, it's an interesting roller coaster of things that truly our audience would not believe it. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, I'm unemployed and I stay at home a lot. So, you know, you can more or less, you can infer from that. But I have been picking up a bit of freelance stuff here and there, and which is at least fun to go and do, even if I don't get paid for it immediately. But yes, you know, lots of watching the news, lots of staying in, trying to do really cheap things, lots of bombing around on my girlfriend's Switch, pretending to be an angry goose, all that sort of thing. So, how about you?
Well, Goose related, I discovered, well, I didn't discover it. It existed already before I showed up. But I found the best Twitter account I've ever seen. It's called @transgoose. I encourage everyone to follow it, because it's basically just a goose who honks at transphobes on Twitter.
Nice.
Brings me endless fucking joy.
Yeah, that's fair.
We're going through some kind of geese-related moment, aren't we? Like with this game that's coming out. There was a BBC story about a goose that, like...
It's already out. It's already out. The game is already out, and I've played it, and lots of people have played it, and it's gone straight to the top of the gaming charts, pop pickers, and...
So what's it called for people that may not know what it's called?
Untitled Goose Game, basically.
Great title.
Which, yeah, it is. It's pretty snappy, isn't it? But it is, well, the description of it starts with, you know, it's a lovely day in the village, and you are a horrible goose. And it's like, oh... So to say that it's an angry goose is actually a bit of a misnomer. You're just a dickhead goose who just is going around, and your little to-do list that you can look at has got various creative little ways of really getting in people's... You know, people just want to go about their day, and you don't like that as a goose. So you can just go and trip people up and steal a harmonica and break vases and flap at people aggressively, all that sort of thing. But it is actually genuinely quite hilarious and very charming. So, but it does tap into something. I read a theory about this whereby lots of people, and you know, I saw myself in this somewhat, are very, very nice in video games. They'll choose the moral options. They'll choose the nice, pleasant, conversational options. You know, it's like, no, I don't want to say that to that NPC. They won't like me. And so there's a lot of people with a certain amount of pent-up nastiness, which this game seems to provide an outlet for. It's like, ha, I'm an angry goose and you will feel my wrath. So, yes, it's as a game, though, it is tremendous fun, if nothing else. And I actually haven't laughed like that at a video game for a long time. The last game that provoked a reaction like that was Life is Strange, and that wasn't laughing at all. That was like, you know, ugly crying and gay. But yes, it's super good fun and just what I needed after the chaos of this particular week. So
good. I mean, I desperately want to play this this Goose game. I mean, and I'm also a little bit sick that we didn't title this show Untitled Trans News Podcast.
Untitled Trans Podcast. I mean, we can rebrand. It's fine, you know.
Not sure we can at this point. Like, I mean, if we changed the name, it would just people be looking at their apps and just being like, well, what the trans have disappeared, and I've got this whole Untitled Trans Podcast? Who the fuck are these people? Anyway.
Yeah, we have settled into our brand identity. But I actually think part of our brand identity, as well as you and I occasionally wittering about music and games and stuff, does involve us doing an actual podcast about trans things, which I think is maybe what we should get on with doing now. So, to start us off, and as fair warning, we're going to be spending a certain amount of this podcast talking about courts. And as in not tennis courts or where you go to play badminton or whatever. Is it a badminton court? I've actually no idea. But as in the place where people go to get legal decisions made. Riveting stuff, I know, but we'll try and rattle through the technical stuff and then we'll be able to focus somewhat on the implications. Now, I was in London for a couple of days last week, as I mentioned, doing a bit of work, and so I was in the office in London when there were two quite big bits of legal news that emerged. Firstly, the Supreme Court here in the UK did something the government very much was not expecting, but we'll be coming back to that, because the following day, in the High Court, something specifically relevant to trans people took place. The High Court ruled that Freddie McConnell, a transgender man who has given birth to his child, does not have the right to be registered as the father on the child's birth certificate, which is kind of a problem. At the moment in the UK, anybody who gives birth is recorded on the birth certificate as the mother of the child, no matter what the gender of the parent is, which I think it's fair to say can cause some issues when applied to trans people. Trans men and non-binary people absolutely should have the right to be recorded accurately on all documents, including on birth certificates. However, the High Court was perhaps unmoved by this concept and actually ruled against Freddie McConnell. It is possible, if not likely, that this decision will be appealed, but in the meantime, the law stays the same. So Karen Holden, who is a lawyer for the case and founder of a city law firm, gave the following statement to Pink News. As a firm that champions equality, we are, of course, disappointed at the judgment, and it highlights how the law is slow to keep up with modern society. Freddie is legally a man, and his legal papers display the same. In the UK, he has the right to change his gender on his own birth certificate, so why not his child's? Surely, if you are going to move with modern times, the law has to finish the journey it has started. A birth certificate will stay with a child for life, and it will be factually and legally inaccurate under current rules. So, actually, nice one there, Karen. You pretty much nailed it. Currently, UK birth certificates list a father and a mother, which is another example of the gender data questions found on almost all government forms, and actually touches on the whole question of why exactly it seems to be necessary to collect that data on absolutely everything in the first place. But that's perhaps a conversation for a whole other episode sometime. McConnell's case, however, specifically hinged on the way that someone is recorded as a parent on the birth certificate. His primary claim in court was that the current law is being misrepresented and that as someone who is in all respects legally male, he has the right to register on his child's birth certificate as either their father or simply parent. Had the case been decided the other way, his child would have been the first person in UK history to not have anyone recorded as mother on their birth certificate. So as far as we here on the podcast are concerned, the UK High Court has gotten this wrong, and I really hope that this is appealed and successfully. And it's particularly weird considering that it would have been very easy for them to get it right. There's a certain amount of evidence that exists already surrounding this from other parts of the world, and most predominantly from Australia, which is currently the only country that collects statistics on male birth parents. 205 men are recorded as having given birth between 2013 and 2018. So it's not loads, but it's not nothing either. If you're interested in finding out a bit more about this and the community that does exist of male and non-binary birth parents, we would heartily recommend looking at the Trans Pregnancy Project, with which we'll put a link to that in the description. So, did you catch any of this at all, Michelle, in the news?
I did, although my head has been very firmly stuck in America this week, because that's going to be the meat of the episode. Me wittering on about the Supreme Court for far too long, probably. So I haven't been following the British news as closely as I usually would, but I can say that there are several implications to this that immediately stand out from what you said. I mean, setting aside the horrific dysphoria element of being named a mother when you are a man. And if anyone has
Right.
ever seen or talked to Freddie McConnell, it's like, I mean, I don't get the impression he is someone who gets misgendered a lot. Let's just put it that way. Like, I can see that if he's ever in a position where he legally has to sort of provide his child's birth certificate for some reason, and he is listed as the mother on it, that's going to cause incredible bureaucratic nonsense and bullshit, because they're going to be like, well, look at you. You're clearly not this kid's mother. And he's going to be like, I know, but there's a whole court thing, Google it. And it's going to be a whole thing, potentially, for the rest of his life, which is profoundly unfair to put him in that situation, which is what the current laws and legal situation around that is doing. It's effectively forcing him to lie a lot.
Essentially, and I think a really salient point is the fact that on all other documentation, McConnell is recorded as a man. He's male. But then saying that, oh, no, birth certificates are different. They have to be ring-fenced and protected in some way from those damn gender ideologists is just, where are we drawing the line here? And as Holden, the lawyer, said, society and civilization are moving forward, and really the law needs to keep up, because there are men who give birth. There are non-binary people who give birth. There are things connected with that we need to put a little bit more thought into than just saying, oh, no, the rules as they stand are absolutely fine. And those people that we are, misgendering on an official government form can just lump it, essentially. To me, it calls up the question, why not start recording birth certificates in a more gender neutral and inclusive way anyway? Just have two individuals or more listed as the parents of the child, which obviously that is going to take into account more the growing number of what are being called in the press rainbow families, which do not fit some of the more heteronormative ideas that society has about families. And some of that is same-sex couples. Some of that is, perhaps being raised by people who are in a poly relationship of some kind or whatever, all sorts of different ways to be a family, which, stuff like this, which is saying, oh, no, there's one rule for this and one rule over here, and these people are slightly weird and different, so we're going to treat them like shit.
Can I ask, is there any genuine need for it to be recorded on the birth certificate who specifically, I guess, pushed the new life into the world out of themselves? Like, is that is there some legal need for that?
Right, and that's the root of it, isn't it? That's the real question, because if there genuinely is some kind of real need, I think the government or whichever, civil service or whoever should kind of prove that. If the burden of proof, the claim is that, well, no, it has to be recorded as a mother and a father on the birth certificate. And it's like, well, what about people who've conceived through surrogacy and whatever else? So the mother of the child is not the person who gave birth to the child, but the egg came from the person who is going to be raising the child. And it kind of, with the insistence on it being so binary, like that, then that is just going to cause several administrative snafus for several different types of people, trans people, obviously, specifically in this case, on the receiving end of it. So as has been mentioned briefly, I haven't got very many details on this, but comments that McConnell made to the press shortly after the judgment was announced do suggest that he plans to appeal the decision, which brilliant, good, best of luck to him. And also, you may have heard Freddie McConnell's name before because he is the subject of the film Seahorse, which is a documentary film which came out quite recently and is definitely worth your time if you're able to check it out. So more on this story as it develops. For when and if that appeal is launched, we look forward to it. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe there is any legal need for gender to be recorded as aggressively as it is on quite a lot of government forms. There's why is it so important to the government to have that particular slice of information? And they might say, oh, well, you need that to determine this and that and the other, and holding those claims up to the appropriately sized magnifying glass, and it all starts to seem a little, well, actually, why? But once you start pulling on that thread, it starts to unravel a lot of things that people are just taking for granted and say, oh, no, we're keeping it like that because that's the way we've always done it, and because obviously that always works out so well for everybody. Anyway, fun and games, right?
Yeah. Also, I very briefly met Freddie at Trans Pride Brighton. At that point, he had just been outed by the press, as he was hoping to keep himself anonymous to avoid all of the inevitable bullshit that will come from being a very prominent trans person looking to make a change in society. So I chose not to get him on the record or, ask him for an interview, but I did talk to him very briefly, and he's a lovely guy. He deserves so much better than this. Obviously, all trans people do, but, he's just lovely, and I don't like it when lovely people get treated like shit, which is what is happening.
Pretty much. So, however, moving on, let's try and chomp through this stuff as quickly as we can, because, gosh, don't we have a lot to get through today. So even though we are specifically a trans podcast, we are a UK trans podcast, and it would therefore be remiss of us to not at least mention the ongoing clusterfuck that is Brexit.
What is Brexit?
I'll explain later. The day before the McConnell verdict in the High Court, something quite different was taking place in the Supreme Court, which unanimously ruled against the government and found that racist liar and Prime Minister Boris Johnson has done his signature move and misled both Parliament and the Queen when deciding to suspend or prorogue Parliament, which we reported on in the last episode. Parliament is now unsuspended. Legally, the prorogation never took place, and MPs have celebrated their return to work in the usual way by bellowing across the Commons at each other. Now, there were a few points of interest in the wake of this, some delightful schadenfreude too, if you're not too fond of Boris Johnson, but on the day the ruling was announced, the man himself was in New York, bumbling his way through a series of talks and meetings, which then had to be curtailed for Johnson to return to London. Leader of the House of Commons and Haunted Pencil, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said that the ruling was a constitutional coup, which is a fascinating legal analysis given that the UK does not actually have a constitution. A few days after the return of Parliament, though, it was reported in The Independent that the Queen had taken legal advice over her own ability to fire Johnson if he doesn't abide by what's known as the Benn Act and seek an extension to Article 50 from the EU, which is hilarious, and it's actually quite nice to see a royal doing something useful for a change. However, as we've noted on the podcast before, in the event that Brexit goes ahead, the impact on the LGBT community could be significant. This week, Gina Miller, the woman who has now successfully defeated the government in court twice over Brexit, including last week's Supreme Court verdict, wrote an article for Pink News in which she added her voice to concerns that have already been aired here and in other places that the government may seek to discard legal protections for LGBT people and other marginalised groups post-Brexit. Miller points out in the article that the government's rhetoric surrounding the ruling and this phase of the Brexit shambles in general is dangerous, particularly Johnson's framing of the decision as a people versus elites kind of vibe, which smacks of the classic divide and rule tactic. She went on to say, "What began as a debate on how we leave the European Union has turned into something that is quite different and imperils freedom and a tolerant way of life. It may well be that this was always the real agenda, a top-down authoritarian regime that sows intolerance, narrow patriotism and othering, talking all the time about them and us. And it is a very dangerous road for the UK to be venturing down." Which, yes it is. So, again, just a Brexit update, really. Again, there's not a great deal that can be done. There could be any one of a number of things that are about to happen or maybe would happen or, God, I don't even know. But the clock is still ticking towards our ostensible exit from the EU on October the 31st. Happy Halloween. So, yeah, I mean, I know you've been immersed in the American news recently, but the Supreme Court verdict was really big news last week. And, all of the usual suspects in terms of this publication or that one were out railing in force against the decision of the Supreme Court. With the usual language surrounding it of like, traitors, Ramonas and all that sort of thing. So yeah, did you catch this at all?
I did, and I do actually have a little tale recently, a sort of a microcosm of what is going on in the United Kingdom that I have seen in front of my very eyes recently.
Yeah.
The sort of, you talking about Gina Miller reminded me of this when she was saying that us versus them and all this other stuff that is being put out there by the government. And it starts off when I was going shopping in Streatham, and which is where I live. Try to find me, people. And I just approached Tesco, the big Tesco in Streatham. And outside of the train station there were a couple of people handing out this paper. I think it was called the London Worker or something like that. And so I picked it up and just like, a bunch of socialists, pamphleting in Streatham. That seems cool. So I picked it up, read it, immediately clocked them for what they are. They were tankies. People that don't know, tankies are people that love the shit out of Stalin, they love Mao. Basically, they love communism so much they find a way to apologise for some of history's most genocidal, horrible monsters. So they're basically, in my eyes, about 2 steps away from being Holocaust deniers in my eyes, so I quickly told them to go fuck themselves and moved on with my day. Now, later on I was doing some research into this group of tankies who are... They've got this really unwieldy name called the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist.
Yes. Leninist.
I don't know if you've heard of them.
I have, they have crossed my desk, as it were.
Yeah, apparently they keep showing up at leftist stuff and just being awful, and everyone hates them, and rightfully so, because they're garbage. And it was really upsetting to... And they're also massively anti-LGBT. Like, they say on paper that they are down with protecting LGBT people from discrimination, but they see being trans as a bourgeoisie capitalist thing. I don't know. They're full of shit. But anyway, I was online doing some research on these and found that they are incredibly pro-Brexit. And there have been several groups that are very, very pro-Brexit on the far right who have said that they love this group because they're the only people that will show up with them to stand next to them. So on Twitter, in a moment of weakness, because I don't like to do some things like this, I basically tweet them saying, you know that they are like stupendously homophobic and ridiculously racist and just a bad group of people who apologise for Stalin. And their reply was, yeah, well, they love Brexit. And that's, I think, something that people are misunderstanding about the pro-Brexit side. They want Brexit at almost any cost.
Yes.
Like, a lot of them will stand with the most horrible monsters you can imagine, and they don't care if it tanks the economy. They don't care of any of the negative implications. They know people could die, and they don't seem to care about that because they want out of the EU so much. And this feeds into what Gina Miller was saying. That there's a very, very big undercurrent of us versus them and Brexit at all costs. And I can just see the road in front and it doesn't look good. It looks like fighting in the streets, and that sounds terrifying and maybe hyperbolic, but that doesn't seem out the realms of possibility at this point.
Indeed. And, well, I think... one of the reasons some people are so keen on the idea of Brexit at any cost is, and this was something else that was reported, I think, in the Independent, Press Gazette, Byline News, a couple of the other places, but strangely, the mainstream media, for the most part, overlooked it, which is prompted by a comment from Boris Johnson's sister, in fact, whereby there's been a lot of people speculating and essentially betting with large amounts of money that the UK will have a Brexit and the economy will collapse and everything, and from that they will make money. The concept is known as disaster capitalism, and...
oh, they want to short the UK economy?
Exactly. So...
oh, Jesus.
So those people, personally, will make absolutely billions, while... obviously, the majority of the people in the UK suffer and starve and go without medication and whatever else. So that's one interpretation, also one which, rings a little too close to home for me to completely dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, unfortunately. So, but anyway, more on Brexit as it continues to shamble along, ruining things.
Fuck me, that's dark. They're willing to tank a fucking economy to make some cash? I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, really, should I?
It's making a lot of cash, and plus there's the EU anti-money laundering directive that's coming in January, which I suspect the Haunted Pencil and various others would deeply wish to avoid because of their own financial arrangements. But anyway, let's park that. Let's put a pin in that. Let's come back. Let's dial it back down again. Come closer to home for the trans community, but staying in the same sort of theme, because moving on to some more dangerous rhetoric from our old friends at the Times, who have been up to their usual tricks in an even more bullshitty way than usual. The paper ran a piece in the Sunday edition which was initially titled "Injury Fears Over Rugby's Trans Women Off Pitch," which to me actually just looks like shitty grammar, but whatever. The story was quote-unquote reporting on some groups of perfectly reasonable concerned citizens who objected to transgender inclusive guidance. The group of very fine people in question? Fair play for women, of course. A group of bigots who hate trans people and want to use their faux concern about women's sports as a mask for their anti-trans campaigning. But the fact that the Sunday Times chose to once again give a platform to this group is not in itself particularly surprising. This time, however, they chose to illustrate the article with a picture featuring Verity Smith, a trans man who is also a rugby player. Even though the article focused on the junk science quote-unquote biological advantage argument about trans women being a danger to cis women on the pitch, For whatever reason, the Times chose to illustrate this with a picture of a trans man. Smith played for the Rotherham ladies football team for many years before coming out and transitioning after the Rugby Football Union adopted more inclusive rules. Smith has subsequently actually left the Rotherham team and now plays for Leeds Rhinos Wheelchair Rugby, a mixed gender and ability team, but a photograph of him with his former teammates at Rotherham was the one that was used in the article. Now, after criticism from everyone with an ounce of sense, the Times did change the headline and the photograph and replaced all references to Smith in the story with another player who is a trans woman. However, I would be inclined to point out that this is hardly better, it's just moving that victimisation onto somebody else. Unusually, though, they did print a retraction of the original story, saying that the use of Smith's photograph in particular was inappropriate and misleading. So, if you're worried about being inappropriate and misleading, Times journalists, look at literally the rest of your coverage. A lot of people have pointed out, of course, that using a photograph of a trans man for a fear-mongering story about trans women seeks or seems to deliberately conflate those things in the minds of the readers. Many anti-trans campaigners will, deliberately or otherwise, conflate trans men and women with the effect of muddying the waters surrounding the, well, let's be charitable and call it the discourse.
Right, so that's that. What's next?
So to finish up the UK-based news for this week, two quick pieces of good news, surprisingly. Now, this emerged a little while ago, but we've not mentioned it simply because we've kind of not had time, or it's been in the episode plan and we kind of forgot to mention it. But Leeds Gender Identity Clinic are finally keeping up with the modern world and have discussed plans to offer Skype calls for some appointments at the gender clinic. Woo! Progress. As I'm sure many of our audience know, the current waiting times for appointments at all 7 of the UK's gender clinics can be in excess of a year and may involve the patient travelling to the opposite end of the country to have an appointment. And I speak from personal experience here. One of my appointments at the London Gender Clinic took 30 minutes, literally half-hour appointment, and did not involve any kind of physical examination. It was just a conversation about, so how are you getting on, all that kind of thing. But I was poor, so I had to take the megabus, which is 5 hours from Manchester down to London and 5 hours back again, plus travelling across London, plus paying for getting to and travelling across London, all for a 30-minute appointment we could quite easily have done over Skype or Discord or even on the fucking phone. Remember those? They were pretty big at one point. So we at the podcast welcome this news and would like to see it adopted more widely across the GIC system, particularly for mid-treatment appointments which function simply as a checking in. It makes sense for the patients and the staff, and really the only surprise is that it's taken this long. So what do you think?
Well, I have taken that megabus many times to come and see you,
Yes.
and it is awful.
Yes.
So my heart breaks for you there. I was one of the lucky ones because I lived in London, but whilst I was going to the gender clinic, I was dealing with, a mega anxiety disorder that meant leaving the house on some days was impossible. So obviously the idea of doing it from Skype, even though I am about 90 minutes away on the public transport from the clinic, if I could have done it in my pyjamas on Skype, that would have been so much better for me at that time, and would be so much better for less able, physically or psychologically able people to be able to access these services. I'm astonished that they didn't do this before, but not surprised, because when I went to the gender clinic, my clinicians didn't even use a computer. They wrote things down with a pen.
Yeah.
And in the rooms, it was just an empty desk with a keyboard on it, but no computer. It didn't look like they had any computers other than on the front desk, which was strange. That might be different now, but at the time, it's just...
Yeah. No,
they did not seem those technologically advanced.
And they don't seem terribly willing to change and roll with new things. However, if that started at Leeds, hopefully that produces some best practice that they can then pass on to their colleagues and say, look, start doing this, it'll help. Because every little helps, to be perfectly honest. So let's just zip straight on to the final story, which is that Helen Mirren said trans rights. Yeah! Love Helen Mirren. In an interview with The Telegraph earlier this week at the time of recording, the legendary actor said that she doesn't believe in binary definitions of gender and sexuality, and even went so far as to say, if being a TERF means not accepting trans women or women, then I am not a TERF. Which, to me, that is such a relief. It's good to know the UK still has one or two national treasures who haven't turned out to be nasty bigots. So thank you, Helen. We love you. Even if Mumsnet might have decided that you're evil now, do you really want to listen to them? But yes. And I only mention that because I'm I'm a total fangirl for Helen Mirren. Do I stan Helen Mirren? I've no idea what that even really means, but I think I'm probably too old to stan things. But Helen Mirren is awesome, and thank you for your support if you're listening, which you're almost certainly not.
It would be pretty fucking incredible if we somehow discovered that Helen Mirren is a fan of the show.
I mean, wouldn't it?
I don't think I'd ever recover from that.
Yeah, I think that would be it. It's like, well, we don't need to do this anymore. Like, like we've
hit the heights.
We've hit the height.
That's it.
That, we've ascended to a higher height than ever we thought we could.
One thing I did see on Twitter, and I haven't checked the veracity of this, but Joss Pryor, who is also one of my favourite people tweeting, because she just tears apart TERFs all day, and she does it with such a gleeful ferocity. I love her. So everyone go on Twitter and follow Joss Pryor. She's great. She gave out a tweet saying that currently Mumsnet people are looking at pictures of Helen Mirren trying to find an Adam's apple.
Oh, God's sake.
I haven't been on Mumsnet myself to confirm this with my own eyes, but I could totally see that being a thing.
Yes. Yes, I can see that as well. Well, I mean, they are genuinely do get obsessed with cis female celebrities, not even necessarily the ones that have spoken out in support of trans rights. One of them just got this mad idea that Keira Knightley was trans, and it's like, no, she's not.
I mean, it would be great if she was, but she totally isn't.
Yeah, we can speculate on that one, which is exactly what they were doing, by the way. But like literally crawling over publicity photographs, looking for an Adam's apple and saying, oh, look at the shape of this and that and the other. And it's like, what are you, phrenologists now? Like, are we... although, mind you, it's really not that far off. Some of them scratch a transphobe, find something. Anyway.
Actually, on that, Kathleen Stock, the transphobic philosopher who works out of Brighton University, she did start sharing, like, race science-y shit.
Yes, she did.
From the Quillette at one point.
She did, yes. Which, that's interesting, isn't it?
It's a slippery slope. Like, I don't usually like slippery slope logic, but it's happening in front of our eyes. These people that start off as predominantly left-wing people who have concerns about trans issues, like, in a very short space of time, are just like, oh, race science is cool.
Yeah, totally on board with that. So, and that concludes the news, which is delightful. And we're going to be moving on to the next bit of the show, which we've started calling the meat. And it's a very meaty meat this time, although it might be a meat that's been washed in chlorine or something due to differing food handling standards. But yes, Michelle has done very, very sterling work doing a tremendous amount of deep dive flavoured research into the goings-on in the American Supreme Court. But before we get into that, we have something that we want to pick on from our most recent episode. Michelle, I believe you have the details.
Yeah, so I have to issue a correction, which is something that we haven't done before. And I've been trying to work out how to do it because we've never had to, which I guess that either means we'd be doing amazing work or we have made tons of mistakes that nobody's noticed. But I'm going to choose to believe that it's the former. But anyway, so before we get to the meat, I do have to correct something from the last episode. This was my mistake. I didn't have anything to do with it. This one is entirely on me. So I did the report from Trans Plus Pride London last time. And in that story, I said there were two groups trying to organise two different trans prides. Well, it turns out that was wrong, and I incorrectly attributed some actions to the wrong group. So here to clear matters up is Lucy Clark, founder of Trans Pride London, who plan to hold their first event in 2020. She is also one of the higher-ups at Trans Radio UK, who I thoroughly encourage you to go and listen to. So, I'll play the tape, shall I?
Yes, play the tape.
Hello, Lucy Clark. Thank you so much for coming on and setting the record straight. How's it going?
Yeah, no, it's going very well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
It's all right. It's absolutely all right. So, on the last episode, just to give people a little bit more background, I reported on the story of how Trans Plus Pride London came about, and I basically said that there was a group that split into two, and I incorrectly attributed your group as one of the groups that was splitting off, but that wasn't the case. So what's your story? What's your role in all this?
So my role is, okay, so originally we'd decided that we was going to put on a Trans Pride in 2019. Trans Pride London, that is, in 2019. So we started the ball rolling, shall we say. We sort of looked into it, started to form a committee to get ready, because obviously it's going to be a big event. So we started making plans, very tentative plans, but we did start making plans. But then another group announced that there was going to be a Trans Pride or London Trans Pride in Hackney in 2019. So at this point, we was like, right, okay, if somebody else, it seemed that they'd announced that it was going to be in Hackney. So you're kind of thinking, right, okay, they've got venues, they've got this and that organised. And if they're that far down the line, we'll pull back, which we did. So we went like, right, okay, we'll put the brakes on ours because somebody's got something up and running and already, which is fabulous. So at this point, we offered our support. When I sort of say we, on that point, I mean kind of trans radio, offered our support, let us help you. This is fabulous. This is what, we was going to do. So that was it. We offered our support on quite a few occasions, but never really got anything back. One little email saying, they will be in contact. We sent probably 5 or 6 emails. So we kind of sat back and waited, I think, along with a lot of other people as well. And then it kind of seemed, there wasn't a lot happening. Nothing was being announced. Nothing. There was not a lot of feedback. People were asking questions, and there was no answers. So again, probably July time, we sort of thought, right, okay, look, this event in Hackney is not going to happen. Let's start our plans up again. But this time for 2020, because you can't put an event on, in my opinion, in the space of a month. So we started making plans again, but this time for 2020. At which point, the original group that had said the Hackney one, one of the people that was the organisers had said that she'd stood down. And then the other group, so she stood down from them, which was, as I say, nothing to do with us. This is just all online. You can go, have a look and see what I'm saying is correct.
I was a little bit disappointed to see all of the stuff that was going on, and it was very confusing because honestly, I had no idea that there was a third group, a third party somewhere. But
yeah, I think there's London Trans London Trans Pride and Intersex. So they're the ones that I think that the one that organised the march spoke to them, and then they said, no, you can't use the word intersex and stuff like that. Because so what's happening with them, I don't really know.
Well, honestly, I don't think there's going to be much benefit to the listeners who are listening in on this to speculate and to try and go into every bit of detail about what the infighting and stuff. I think the best thing to do here is probably try to put on some damn good fucking events.
Yeah, of course. And, London, as I say, it's a capital city, and you can put on an amazing event. And, the whole of the trans community, wherever they fall under the umbrella, can have an amazing day. And my vision, I'll tell you what our vision was or is to have the march, which will be to celebrate, but also protest and let everyone know, kind of like, let's be fair, I think Trans Pride Brighton have got that right. And from what I can see, and I've heard, the march that took place in London, perfect. You don't want the floats and, people turning up just to be there on a march or a parade, however you want to, whatever you want to call it. And then that march will end at a venue that's got a good stage, a good infrastructure, has got all the stalls and everything there, information for people that may need it. So you'll get all the stalls covered, but you'll have a really good time, and lots of artists up there that again all fall under the trans umbrella, whether they be, singers, bands, whatever. If people have got talent, they showcase it. They showcase the talent that we've got, and everyone have an amazing day, from start to finish.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for coming on and setting the record straight, and look forward to whatever you and your people come up with.
No worries, and keep up the good work.
Thanks.
And so, across the Atlantic now for the meat, Michelle.
Yeah, this is a big one. I'm going to try and get through it snippily. But if you have any questions, Ashleigh, feel free to cut in, and I will try and be succinct and to the point, because there is a lot here. In the research of this, I had to do a hell of a lot of reading, and I worked out that at the end of it, I read probably about a novel's length worth of stuff. which I've never had to do this amount of reading for a subject before, because this is possibly the biggest, most complicated thing that I've ever attempted to try and break down for this show, so bear with me. So, this meet is going to be about America. That country that is huge, wealthy, and currently shitting itself inside out politically and existentially. Something that is going around at the moment.
I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that outside my house. Anyway, I, dearest Ashleigh, would like to draw your attention to the 8th of October, where the Supreme Court will hear 3 cases concerning LGBT employment discrimination. They will work out, basically, if it is legal to fire a person for being LGBT, but there could be far deeper reaching repercussions that could affect the rights of every single American, cis, trans, non-binary, but I'll get to that later. It is important to start this by saying that right now, around half of America's LGBT population are not covered by any employment discrimination protection. Only half the states have explicit protections for LGBT people, the rest don't. So the 8th of October has the potential to be one of the most important days for LGBT equality, because this could result in LGBT people having nationwide protection instead of a zip code lottery like there is now. And I really want to go deep with you on this, because America has a tremendous amount of trans people there, and I think this is a really, really important thing to know about, because America is one of the biggest, most powerful, and let's be honest, utterly ridiculous countries on Earth. And I'm a British person saying that, and we know about what makes a ridiculous country. We practically invented the concept.
We sure did.
So let's break this down. First up, what is the Supreme Court? It is basically one of the main pillars of the US legal and government systems. The idea is the Supreme Court is where big, important, constitutionally important legal cases are heard and decided on by 9 Supreme Court justices who are supposed to be the dream fucking team of the best legal minds in the USA. The idea being that as the appointments to the Supreme Court are lifelong, but they can retire, but they can't essentially be fired. And they're not subject to elections, that they are a relatively free institution of party politics. However, as we can see in the UK's House of Lords, which has a kind of similar way of getting into the House of Lords, this doesn't tend to happen. The judges who reside on the court, which is referred to casually as the bench by many, are selected by the sitting president, and the appointments must be confirmed by the Senate. Both of those institutions, if you hadn't noticed, are incredibly political, and they tend to vote for justices that share their values. The idea is supposed to be that Democrats and Republicans come together in the Senate and confirm someone that everyone can get behind. But you can pretty much assume that a Democrat president will pick a Democrat-y judge and a Republican president will pick a Republican-y judge. As such, the current makeup of the court could be said to include 5 conservative judges and 4 liberal left-wing judges. This is important and we'll get to that later, but there's also a lot of room for movement there. You have many times in the past where conservative judges have gone with the liberal side and the liberal judges have gone with the conservative side on certain things, depending on who they are.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense so far?
It absolutely does, yeah. So essentially, and it's similar, people keep drawing comparisons to the way the Supreme Court works with the way the House of Lords can work in the UK, where it's supposed to be non-political, but in practice it kind of very much is. So, but yes, so I think the problem, or one of the concerns rather, well, there's several problems really, but one of the definite concerns that a lot of American LGBT people have about this is simply the makeup of the current court, in that the numbers might not go our way, and particularly with a couple of the judges, one of whom, Brett Kavanaugh, we have already discussed on the podcast, infamous as he is. So yes, who else? Who else are the judges? Because the only sort of 2 that I can immediately think of off the top of my head are Brett Kavanaugh and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is obviously absolutely legendary for all of the right reasons. So who else is on there?
I'll give you a brief rundown on who the judges are, but it should be noted that I am no kind of American legal scholar of any kind. These are basically enhanced Googling, is what I like to call it, because this is not something that comes up in my everyday life. So I had to do a whole bunch of reading from people that know better. But I will very briefly sum up the 4 liberal judges first and then the 5 conservative judges. So we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is the person that you've probably, if you've ever heard of any of them, you will have heard of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's been on the court forever. She's like in her 80s. She's had lung cancer, but she's still going, I suspect, because Trump's in office and she doesn't want to die on his watch.
Yeah, that's fair. Staying alive out of spite is something that I very much resonate with. Carry on. Yeah,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the best. But yeah, she's a massive supporter of abortion rights, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty safe to say that she will almost certainly go with LGBT equality on this issue. Steve Breyer, liberal, appointed by Bill Clinton, decided in favour of gay marriage. Probably a safe bet. Then you got Sonia Sotomayor, a Liberal appointed by Obama, went with gay marriage, but she hasn't really been on the bench that long, so who knows? We got Eleanor Kagan, Liberal, pro-gay marriage. Probably a safe bet based on the decisions she's had because she's been in the court a bit longer. And then we got the 5 Conservatives. And here there is some room for movement, which I was very surprised to read. There's John Roberts, who was appointed by George W. Bush. He's sort of the leader of it, the head of it. They have an official title, but I can't remember specifically what it is. But he's like in charge of it. He tends to write a lot of the decisions himself. He's kind of, I guess, the voice of the court.
I see. The speaker.
I guess, in a way, yeah. I mean, they all speak to the press, which is something the judges here, don't do as a rule. But the Supreme Court judges can and do often talk to the press about their decisions afterwards, and even beforehand sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, John Roberts has worked with the Liberal bloc a few times, but could honestly go either way. He did dissent against gay marriage, but in the case of Pavin v. Smith, where Arkansas didn't want to list same-sex parents on birth certificates, and thankfully the Supreme Court told them to fuck that noise, he did not join the dissenters. He didn't go with the Liberal bloc on that, but he didn't join the people that were against it. So maybe there's room there.
Yeah.
But this is all speculation because the gay marriage thing was a whole different kettle of fish compared to this stuff.
It's a whole new ball game.
Exactly. I'll go into why that is in a bit. And then there's Clarence Thomas, who is apparently, according to many commentators out there, the most conservative judge.
Right.
But based on his judgment of Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, I think there's room to move here because that case was officially the case that decriminalized homosexuality in the United States in 2003. Because in Texas at 2003, they still had a law on the books saying that actually committing, anal sex, gay sex, is a crime, which is astounding to me because I was alive in 2003.
You were?
Yeah. Many people were. So this is Texas. A very recent living memory.
Yes, quite.
He argued that this was a state issue, even though he said the law prohibiting anal sex was uncommonly silly, mostly because they need the police to police private sexual behaviour is a waste of time. So that, I don't know, he is very much an enemy of LGBT equality, but then I think there may be room to move that. I honestly don't know.
Well,
also, it should be noted that he has been accused of sexual assault at the time of his induction into the court, and very recently, when all the Brett Kavanaugh stuff came up, by Anita Bryant. So I just feel that's worth mentioning. Then we got Brett Kavanaugh, who's barely been on the court, has also been accused of sexual assault, and a whole other bunch of stuff. He was part of a majority 5-4 decision denying a delay to the execution of a Muslim who wanted an imam to be present with him during the execution. Every angle of that is rotten as fuck. The Supreme Court said that, no, you don't get... Not only are we going to murder you, you're not going to get an imam to stand next to you while you die horribly, which is just grim from top to bottom.
On so many levels. Fractally grim.
Yeah, but he joined the Liberal justices in blocking the execution of an intellectually disabled man in Texas, which is something Texas loves to do. They love to kill people with disabilities. They love it. I think they get off on it. Barring the people of Austin and in the big cities, obviously, but there is a big pro-capital punishment thing in Texas. Yeah. But he also declined to hear the cases from the states of Louisiana and Kansas, where they wanted to block Medicaid-funded abortions from Planned Parenthood, in spite of him being a huge pro-life dude. If he got the cases, he would have been in a position to basically say, no, Medicaid can't pay for abortions. But he was part of the group that pushed it back to the lower courts. Right. Meaning that he is a fucking wild card.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen with him?
Seems to be slightly all over the place, doesn't he?
Yeah, and finally there's Neil Gorsuch. He was the first appointee by Trump after the Senate blocked Obama's nominee from the bench because they are garbage. Conservative and very unlikely to break from that. So that's the court. I think that there is some room for movement in there, but there's also some room for movement from the Liberals as well. So honestly, who knows? But yeah, let's get to the 3 specific cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the 3 cases that I know we've spoken about on the podcast before, where we're saying, so these 3 cases are the ones going to the Supreme Court. These are the test cases. So we're just going to very quickly go through what the details of each of the 3 of them are. We're going to focus specifically on one of them for reasons which I imagine you'll all find fairly obvious. So, yes, first up, Altitude Express versus Melissa Zada.
The story here is that Don Zada was working for a skydiving company called Altitude Express, up until he claimed to have been dismissed for being gay. According to Zada, he was teaching a woman how to skydive and saw that she appeared uncomfortable with being essentially tied to him. You know how they do that? They basically tie.
The buddy jump thing, yeah.
Yeah, so apparently, according to him, he cracked wise and told her that he was gay, so she had nothing to worry about. He claimed that he was fired for this disclosure, and this was discriminatory based on if he had just said that he was straight, he wouldn't have been fired. Tragically, Don Zada died in a base jumping accident, and this is why the named respondent on the case is Melissa Zada, who is his sister, and she wrote a fucking amazing thing in Time magazine that I read. I will post a link to that on the website.
Mm-hmm.
Check it out. She is astonishing. Such huge, tremendous respect for Melissa Zada. But anyway, it must be said that Altitude Express are the ones who are petitioning the Supreme Court, meaning they are the people bringing the case to the court, as Don and Melissa's case had been successful in local and lower courts in the States. Which makes sense because Altitude Express was based in and around New York.
Yeah, so Altitude Express are the ones actually bringing it to the Supreme Court because they are hoping that it will be, no, firing somebody for being gay is absolutely fine, because all the lower courts in New York said that actually, no, it wasn't fine. Which is that's a reversal of what you expect, right? Isn't it? Normally when there's a case that goes all the way up to the top, it's being brought by somebody who has been wronged, whereas in this case, it's Altitude who have done the wronging, and they are essentially seeking to say, yeah, obviously, we're dicks, but we want to make that legally okay.
Well, in Altitude Express's case, they are claiming through their lawyers that they did not fire Zada for being gay. But if they did, it should be fine to do so.
Oh, well, yes, no, that's fine. Obviously, they've not fired him for being gay. That certainly doesn't sound like a lame excuse at all.
Also, if you feel like you want to go out there and Google Altitude Express and give them a load of shit, don't do that, because there is a company in New York who share the name Altitude Express now, but they are not the same people, because when I first looked this up many moons ago on another episode, I emailed them asking for their comment and then saw that they had on their website, we're not the same ones.
Yes.
We are pro-LGBT people and think this Supreme Court case should go absolutely with LGBT equality. We're not them. Like they clearly bought the license to the name or something before they knew what it was, and now they're kind of stuck with it. So, if you...
Be careful, fans.
don't send abuse to preferably anyone online.
Maybe that should be the line.
Yeah, but especially not the Altitude Express or the subsidiary or however it works that are currently in New York, because they're not the same people. Now, next one. Gerard Lynn Bostock, who is the petitioner, versus Clayton County, Georgia, the respondent. Gerard Bostock was the manager of Clayton County's court-appointed Special Advocates Program, a volunteering program with the aim of helping children who had been abused in court proceedings. Wonderful job. Wonderful job that needs to exist. He claims that he was fired after he was outed at work by his colleagues who discovered that he was part of a gay softball team. This case is being brought forward by Gerard, as his case was less successful in gaining traction with his local lower courts because he's in Georgia. He is taking to court the county government, essentially the county itself, which also differentiates the case from Don and Melissa's case, because he isn't going after a private company. He's going after a local government, essentially.
Clayton County, Georgia. Indeed. So we've got two cases about gay men who seem to have been dismissed because of their sexuality. However, as you might infer, the case that we are particularly concerned about is the one that we're about to talk about, which specifically involves a trans woman. We have covered some of the details of this before, but I think we'll just zip through it again.
Yes, this is the case of RG and GR Harris Funeral Homes, who are the petitioner, versus EEOC, who are representing Amy Stevens. Now, I'm just going to call them Harris Funeral Homes from here on in, because, we don't have all the time in the world. But yeah, this is the trans one, as we've been calling it between ourselves over the last couple of months. And as such, this is the one we're probably going to talk about the most, not because the other two are not important. They absolutely are, and we will provide links on the website where you can read up on these, because you absolutely should. They are huge and they are important, but honestly, we only have time to go into one of them properly. As I've mentioned before, there was a lot of research that had to go into this, and we just don't have the time on the show or in our personal lives to go into the nitty-gritty of every single case, even though we are very much aware that LGBT people, trans, non-binary and cis listen to this show. There will be links in the description of this episode. Please have a read of them. But here is the situation with Harris Funeral Homes versus EEOC Amy Stevens. So Amy had worked for Harris Funeral Homes for 6 years, where she worked her way up from an apprentice to a full-on embalming mortician funeral director. She has said in many media pieces all over the place that she loved her job because she was training up as a pastor beforehand and got a real pleasure in helping people who were going through a bereavement. But she was closeted this whole time and decided back in 2013 to come out as trans. According to the petition document brought forward by Harris Funeral Homes' lawyers, linked to in the description, although it's a long one, it's like 30 pages and full of garbage, so, consider your triggers warned. Amy gave a letter to Thomas Rost, her boss, saying that she was trans and that after a holiday she was going to return to work as Amy. The funeral home operate a strict-sounding uniform policy where the men have to wear a suit and the women have to wear a skirt and top or dress suit thing. Basically, trousers for men, not trousers for women. So far, so 1920s. Anyway, as such, Amy would be following the uniform code for women and show up probably looking rad as fuck.
Right.
But Thomas Rost was not happy with the announcement. According to him, Amy was a man, and having a man in a skirt dealing with grieving people could put his business at risk, and his religious beliefs are firmly against the idea of trans people being a thing.
So that's nice, isn't it? That in different states and, various places all over the US, your employer's opinion can get you fired justifiably or not. And of course, that's why there's been quite a lot of talk about these Supreme Court cases, because if they set a precedent that actually the employers have been in the wrong and that the people who are, bringing the cases and have been victims in the cases who have actually lost a job, are the people who are in the right. Now, were that to happen, obviously what we would see is a precedent being set for LGBT equality by the Supreme Court, which would apply across all of the states of the US. But obviously the concern is if that doesn't happen, then that could potentially, wipe the protections that do exist away or give people the opportunity to do that if they...
Oh, we don't know if that's the case.
Well, I think, okay, fine, but I do think we're worried about that, so I don't think expressing it as a concern is too far beyond the pale.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were saying that could be a direct result. Okay, sorry, continue.
And so
apologies.
No, it's fine. And so what a number of people are concerned about are various, regressive elements within the US political system. Would they take the opportunity of a precedent that has gone against the employees? Would they then take the opportunity to submit their own, shall we say, religious freedom bills limiting LGBT equality? Again, that's complete speculation on my part. However, that is the fear that exists for a lot of the LGBT population as a whole in the US. So, this is big and complicated, isn't it?
It is, and we can get a look at the forces behind this because religious freedom, quote unquote, seems to be a big driving force behind this. So the Alliance Defending Freedom are defending Harris Funeral Homes in this, as well as the US government, who have also filed amicus briefs in support of the funeral homes. The Alliance Defending Freedom are an anti-LGBT Christian fundamentalist hardcore conservative non-profit who exists to litigate LGBT people out of existence. The Southern Poverty Law Centre classifies them as a hate group, and when I looked at their website, it's hard to argue with that because they are very much about fuck LGBT people, they are going to end the world. That seems to be their line. That's
their thing, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. There's also a very interesting thing here that I like to go into, where basically the EEOC, who is the named person in the case, as it's Harris Funeral Homes versus the EEOC.
Yes.
They are a government body that are designed primarily to support equal employment opportunity, hence the name.
Indeed.
Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Yes.
And they represented Amy Stevens in her successful court decisions in the lower courts that the Harris Funeral Homes are looking to overturn, but now they are going to be called to argue against their own fucking client and represent the Trump administration and their own interpretations as outlined by the Department of Justice, which is basically that sex is basically your junk. It's your bits. It's your floppies, your dingly danglies, your innies, your whatever.
Yes.
This is very dry. I have to insert some kind of childish nonsense in here somehow.
That's
but
fair.
Yeah. So it's very, very odd that it's named as Harris Funeral Homes versus the EEOC, but the EEOC are going to be arguing in favour of Harris Funeral Homes. And that doesn't mean that Amy Stevens is without representation. The ACLU are basically outfitting her with all the lawyers in the world. Go online, Google ACLU, and donate a load of money.
The American Civil Liberties Union.
Yes, them.
Yeah, I mean...
Give them money.
If If you can, obviously. It sounds like we're making so many demands on you. Go read this, give these people money. It's not, we're not trying to pressure you. It's just if you're interested and you want to help, these things are doable.
I would say I want to pressure you because this is a big one, but, you know...
Well, come on.
Ashleigh's the more calm and collected, so listen to her, don't listen to me. But anyway,
don't know about
is
that.
this making sense to you right now?
It is, yeah. No, so I'm managing to follow this. And I have, of course, read before that the Trump administration and other regressive elements, shall we say, are trying to argue about the definition of the word sex, and that sex, specifically when it's talking about the Civil Rights Act, which I think we're about to come on to, that it doesn't mean sex discrimination based on someone's gender identity or sexual orientation. It is based entirely on what you were assigned at birth. So if that is the interpretation, then it's like, no, you didn't receive sex discrimination because you're trans, because being trans isn't a real thing, so you can just suck it.
Essentially, that seems to be the Trump administration's position.
Yes, I believe it is. So, however, yes, so let's talk about the Civil Rights Act, shall we?
Yeah, so this is getting to the real guts of the thing because the three cases share one thing in common. These cases are not the same as the big LGBT court decisions in the States that have been happening over the last few years, such as destroying the Marriage Protection Act or formally legalizing gay marriage across the states. Those were big constitutional cases based on the interpretation of the US Constitution. That big old thing written by lots of dead white men.
Who owned
and
people.
Dead slave owners. Yeah, that makes watching Hamilton feel quite uncomfortable these days. But anyway, these cases are based on the interpretation of a specific part of a specific law, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the very same one that Martin Luther King Jr. and all of the awesome people working with and around him were campaigning for. In Title 7 of that act, and Title 7 is going to come up a lot, it explicitly says that it is illegal to discriminate in matters of employment on the basis of race, colour, religion, sex, or national origin. In all three of these cases that we're talking about today, the former employees are claiming discrimination under sex discrimination, and that sex in the act also covers sexual and gender identity, as with the two gay guys, they claim to have been fired because they are men who are attracted to men, and if they were women, the firing would not have happened. And in Amy Stevens' case, if her employer didn't incorrectly believe that she is a man, her turning up to work in a skirt would have been no issue. So does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So the argument from the employees' side is that this term sex within the the Civil Rights Act from 1964 does cover those interpretations. And so the Trump administration and various other anti-progress people have been arguing that no, it doesn't. So yes, absolutely, right with you.
Yeah. Obviously, the employers in these cases are fighting this as they are claiming that gender identity and sexual identity do not come under sex discrimination, and they are arguing that sex in the act means basically what is between your legs at birth. And it should be noted here that there is an argument there that could appear to many people to be sound, in that the people who drafted the Civil Rights Act of 1964, they had no idea of it meaning it would cover gay and trans and lesbian and bisexual and all of that, because at that point in a lot of the country, being LGBT was essentially illegal.
Well, not essentially, like actually illegal.
Yeah, I mean, it varied from state to state even back then. There were some states where it was totally cool, so I don't know. I don't want to be pinned down on the specifics of how legal it was in the 60s, but, that is a reasonable point. However, it's hard to believe that any of the people who are in support of the employers or the employers themselves are acting in anything other than just outright homophobia, transphobia, and bigotry based on the people they are surrounding themselves with.
And the people that they got defending them. Yeah,
it's very obvious that this is from bigotry, and they are using that, which sounds on the surface like a pretty, I wouldn't want to say reasonable, but mundane legal argument. This isn't the only thing going on in this area, because it's important to note that right now there is currently an act going through the House and the Senate that seeks to amend the Civil Rights Act, so it explicitly covers sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions of an individual, as well as because of sex-based stereotypes. That's a mouthful. But the chances of this passing and having it amend the Civil Rights Act so it explicitly states those things on the act itself are remote at best, because the Senate is yet to vote on it, and the Senate is lousy with Republicans who are hotly against it because Republicans are gonna Republican.
Yes, they are. So obviously we'll see how that goes. That amendment, I I can detect your lack of optimism, and I feel it mirrors mine.
Well, it should also be said that but the pair of us, we're not legal scholars.
That's very true. That's very true. And, nor do we have people embedded in the court system in the US. Obviously interested to see how that goes, and with my most optimistic face on, I was like, well, maybe it'll be fine, and maybe it will. Maybe the Republicans will finally discover a sense of morality or something, but I don't think it's...
Well, it should be safe to say that the Supreme Court are very much not directly connected to the Republican Party, even though 5 of them have been appointed by Republicans and are very conservative, at least compared to conservatives we have here. Conservatives in America, oof.
Yes.
Like, I think a lot of the Republican Party is closer at this point to UKIP than they are our Conservative Party.
Yes.
And that's probably being kind.
Yeah, it's very true.
So let's get to political repercussions, shall we?
Well, yeah.
What happens if the Supreme Court goes with the former employees? Well, that could very well result in a state of national celebration and international celebration. The Supreme Court ruling that Article 7 does offer LGBT protections would mean that essentially the US will now have nationwide protections for LGBT people. And essentially the need for the Equality Act will be lessened. There's still a lot of other groups that will be covered by it. But when it comes to LGBT people, they won't have to rely on a potentially doomed act to pass to get these protections.
Yeah, it's going to already be there.
But there'll be a lot of fights to come for pregnant people and all sorts of other stuff. But anyway. But what happens if the Supreme Court goes the other way? Seeing as this isn't a constitutional issue, this is about a specific law, that will mean that a legal precedent has been set that the Civil Rights Act doesn't cover LGBT people. That could well mean that things just stay the same as they are now, that some states have protections and some don't. It will also mean that any case that has ever been decided on based on sex covering LGBT people could be at risk from the lower courts. Basically, it could be a total shit show that would take a very long time to recover from, especially with the new Equality Act likely to fail. In the wake of this, it is very likely there will be a spate of firings in the states that don't have their own discrimination protections, and the only recourse would be going for some kind of constitutional argument like they did with the marriage equality, or waiting for the Equality Act to somehow get through a Republican-led Senate, which we've said repeatedly is unlikely.
But not impossible, but yes, unlikely.
Yeah, it would take some significant defections from the Republican Party to do that, and honestly, I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
What with how divided the Senate is now. So another wrinkle is that in all 3 cases, they are also about sex stereotyping based on what a man and a woman should do, and if anybody breaks these conventions and stereotypes, are they viable reasons to fire someone? You have the employees who are all arguing that they were fired essentially for sex stereotypes, that men should be attracted to women and that transgender women should present as men and act like men because they are men. Ugh. So there could well be far-reaching repercussions for all working Americans, and could very well result in cases where employers feel galvanized to fire cis women who don't act feminine enough, or cis men for not acting masculine enough. Obviously, this in itself very much is the exact opposite of what the Civil Rights Act and Title VII were supposed to do in regards to sex.
Yes. So that's fun, isn't it? It's like, say, it always ends up being the opposite of, like saying we're calling it a religious freedom bill, and it's not actually about anybody's religious freedom specifically. It's about freedom to discriminate against people that Christians find icky.
Yeah, but it should be noted that they firmly believe that it is, because I've read a lot of the arguments and I've read a lot of the stuff around it, and I'll go into what amicus briefs are in a bit, but they genuinely believe that if they have to accept LGBT people, that is wrong because they have a moral core that says that being LGBT is wrong, and in some cases dangerous, and they don't want to support something. The way they see it is kind of like someone who, I think they see it, being LGBT as like having some kind of drug addiction, and the law is forcing them to capitulate with a dangerous addiction, if you see what I mean. That's what they believe, as monstrous, as horrible as it is, and I don't see any reason to suspect that there's anything going on there. It's very much like Hitler thought he was improving the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They think they're trying to improve the world, even though they are being monstrous.
Convinced of their own rightness. And in fact, no, I'm quite sure that some of them are fully aware of how monstrous they're being, but they don't care because we're not people to them. So
yeah, that's also going to be a factor too.
Yeah. But I mean, so it's interesting with talking about sex stereotyping and the fact that this is like a pretty crucial part of all three cases. Because there was a previous Supreme Court precedent established, wasn't there? Right? So Pricewaterhouse v. Hopkins.
Yeah.
Anne Hopkins was a cis woman who was denied partnership in her firm, worked in it. Was it a law firm she worked at?
Yeah, she worked for Waterhouse and...
Oh, of course, yeah. What?
For Pricewaterhouse, which is the most legal, is the most law-placed name you could think of.
It certainly is, isn't it? But she kind of won a case where she was denied a partnership in her firm because of this long-running conflict there about how she wasn't feminine enough. And the Supreme Court ruled that this absolutely does count as discrimination. But if they rule against Amy Stevens, then that could be seen as effectively legalizing that discrimination based on gender stereotyping. So, a cis woman who wants to wear trousers at work or a cis guy who might enjoy reading the odd romance novel, that could be at risk, right? For people who are not trans or gay, but are perceived as such, or... but to the extent it could get... I think one of the really unnerving things about this is like, well, there's so many potential knock-on effects that it would be quite difficult to decide, which way do you go? Basically, it's not happened yet, and we can speculate as much as we want, but there are so many things that this could have a knock-on effect on. Speculating is almost useless because it's like, well, we could speculate about dragons and it won't make them real sort of thing until the ruling takes place. But then it's not something that's healthy to have anxiety about. The fact that, here I am, I have a job and I seem safe, but I know perfectly well that my employer would fire me in a trice if they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah, this could very much be a sort of starter flag for a lot of firings.
Yeah.
Like, that is a very real possibility. I would like to read out some quotes from Gillian Brandstetter from the National Centre for Transgender Equality.
Mm-hmm.
They talked to Business Insider, and they also submitted a brief to the court. And I'll go into what briefs are in a second. But she basically told Business Insider that Amy's lawyer probably put it best in saying when Amy was perceived as a man, she was a valued employee, and when she made it clear that she was a woman, she was fired. That's as clear as sex discrimination gets. Yeah. If the Supreme Court were to overturn the laws and protections for transgender people, that would mean that it would become perfectly legal in half the country to fire somebody simply because they are transgender. And if it's legal to fire Amy Stevens for being transgender, it very likely becomes legal to fire a lot of people who aren't transgender but who don't conform to gender stereotypes. The arguments made by Amy's employer and the Trump administration in this case would legalize all sorts of discrimination against women or men who don't conform to gender stereotypes. And this is something that is not as widely reported as I would expect. Because this is a far-reaching implication that goes beyond LGBT people. I mean, you can see it totally being used against cis lesbians who, dress a bit more masculine or whatever. You can totally see it affecting... Hell, I've got a bunch of friends who are cis male who enjoy using a hand lotion. You know what I mean? They could just be like, oh, girly man, fired, for something as ridiculous and silly as that.
I know, right? So, briefs then. Amicus briefs. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, amicus briefs are basically submissions by concerned parties with an interest or insight into the case. Sort of like how in the UK when we hold there's parliamentary select committees, they are open to submissions from the public. These are a bit more rigorous. A lot get turned away. They have to basically submit an essay that references legal decisions in the past. It's proper in-depth stuff, and I've read far too many of them now. So when I close my eyes, I see court names and court decision titles and stuff. It's very strange, but here's a summary of some of the interesting ones, and I would very much like to get your opinion on this first one. Wolf, the Women's Liberation Front.
Yes.
We have talked about them before on the show, but just a brief reminder that they are a TERF group, most famous for being the group of TERFs who have no issues with buddying up with the far right. They have sent people to talk to Tucker Carlson on Fox News. They regularly work with Republicans on anti-trans stuff, and they are alleged to have funded flying over Prime TERFs Posey Parker, Venice Allen, and Dr. Julia Long from the UK on their now infamous trip to Washington, where they famously filmed themselves abusing Sarah McBride from the Human Rights Campaign. They were one of several TERF groups who submitted to the courts, and they are arguing. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them, but there's also a whole bunch of people that didn't, and I will get to them. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But they are arguing for the side that actually want to make it legal for employers to discriminate against transgender people specifically. They did not submit for anything for the cases with the two guys. And if you had any doubts on what TERFs were, look no further than what this is. Amazingly, they cite the Price Waterhouse v Hopkins case in the way that they say that Amy is a man who wants to wear a skirt to work, and as such, Amy is enforcing the sex-based stereotypes, which contravenes the precedent against sex-based stereotyping in the Price Waterhouse case. Which is incredible logic.
Fuck me, what the shit?
I know, it's incredible. They are essentially backing sex stereotyping whilst trying to argue that they are fighting sex stereotyping. And that is allegedly coming from a feminist group.
Do they not see it? Do they not perceive this? Do they not experience some tremendous level of cognitive dissonance? Ugh.
I think there have been many people that have claimed that Wolf are essentially the far right in feminist clothes, and it's hard not to look at that because I went on their website and they claim to be about, the Women's Liberation Front. It's in the name, but they don't seem to talk about anything on their website other than trans stuff.
Shocking.
They don't seem to do anything really. I mean, I could be wrong, and I could be very much wrong. I should put that in there so Wolf don't sue us. Also part of the who filed an amicus brief is the Foundation for Moral Law, a socially conservative, hardcore Christian right legal advocacy group founded by Roy Moore.
Ah, yes, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, for people who don't know, he is an alleged paedophile and sex offender that Trump backed for the US Senate back in 2017. He is also a colossal racist with ties to far-right and neo-Confederate groups. Surprisingly, they have come out defending Amy Stevens, which I didn't see come. No, of course not. They are very much in favour of Harris Funeral Homes. They are very, very much a hate group in my eyes, although I'm not sure if the Southern Public Law Centre has called them that, but looking at their website, they're a hate group founded by a sex offender, so fuck them.
Pretty much. Plus the name kind of gives it away. The Foundation for Moral Law. It's like, okay, so whose morals? I'm guessing sort of Judeo-Christian morals for white, that protect white people and basically nobody else. It's just, the clue's always in the name, isn't it? It's like, the Foundation for Moral Law. It's like the people that start talking about like defending freedom and defending morality inevitably only want to defend their very narrow version of morality. So anyway, carry on.
Yeah, so I was going through this big list of all the people that submitted amicus briefs and other kinds of briefs to the thing, and I was at this for hours because it was fascinating seeing all the different people that submitted stuff and have a stake in this.
Yeah.
And a very strange one was the Intel Corporation attempted to file a brief, but it wasn't accepted for filing. That's a quote. I don't know exactly what that means.
So Intel as in the computer company?
Yeah, as in the people that make the chips. Yeah, those. They wrote in. And I would love to know what they thought of this case, but we won't know because it wasn't accepted. But
I mean, they're probably just trying to protect their coding team because trans people love to do coding. So they're probably just saying, no, we need to go out to bat for all of the nerds we've got. Which, thanks, guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's an assumption. And it's probably a safe one to make. It would be very surprising if Intel were just like, but we really want to fire our LGBT staff.
Yeah.
And it's especially safe claim to make because a lot of the big businesses wrote in, a lot of huge companies did, saying that they support the employees in the situation, including Altria Group Inc., who are a fucking tobacco company that is batting for LGBT employees. I mean, what?
That's a weird one, but I mean, let's not spend our time drilling into the moral stances of various corporations because it's just going to be confusing and all over the place, I should think.
And also, who wrote in with the usual suspects who are coming up to bat for trans people: the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association. There was a whole bunch of different legal associations. There was the American Bar Association came up in support of LGBT people, which was nice. Basically, a lot of big people did come up to bat for LGBT people, but unexpected support, and I will explain why this is unexpected from me in a second, was from the Muslim Bar Association of New York, which was surprising that they came out for LGBT groups, because when I was reading all through this, every other religious group that I could see came out very much against the employees All the other groups tended to be far-right Christian-based, but there was one group called the Jewish Coalition for Religious Liberty, who are basically the Jewish equivalent of the Foundation for Moral Law, only hopefully they weren't founded by a far-right sex offender.
Fingers
but
crossed.
Anyway, I was surprised that they were seemingly the only, like, sort of... I mean, they're a bunch of lawyers, but they also have a religious base, and I was very surprised to see a religious institution writing into this decision. So
The times they are a-changing, Michelle, so,
But this totally puts into touch the claims made by a lot of racists at us when I posted a video of Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, Muslim Mayor of London, leading London Pride, and a lot of people said, oh, look, you better be careful, Muslims want to kill LGBT people, and I was just like, get to fuck. And, if this isn't evidence that Islam and indeed religions in general aren't one thing, I think this is it.
Maybe.
And of course, I don't want to say that that I was surprised at the support, because I genuinely think that Muslims are like LGBT phobic in any way. I was just surprised in this context of finding a religious group that were in support, basically.
Indeed. And, well, because so many of these religious groups, Foundation for Moral Law, Alliance Defending Freedom, etc., you find it a bit difficult to believe that they are actually genuinely, legitimately any sort of religious group, and they are simply saying that they are a religious group in order to try and cloak their bigotry and say, no, my bigotry is justified by God, therefore you have to let me off. It doesn't really seem like it's particularly sincere. There was one brief in support which was written by 18 organisations coming together, and these organisations advocate for victims of sexual assault, domestic violence and other gender-based violence, who explicitly came out in support of Amy Stevens, which completely goes against all the TERF groups who wrote in. So these, on this particular brief, it included the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Women of Colour Network, Inc., and their argument was that by allowing discrimination of transgender people in employment could increase the likelihood of trans people facing sexual violence, which makes sense because if trans people cannot gain gainful and legal and stable employment because people keep firing them simply for being trans, they're going to have to seek out something else. That something else can so often end up as sex work, which leaves people as in much more vulnerable positions in terms of health outcomes, and yes, of course, exposure to violence. So I was really glad to see a statement like that filed as an amicus brief, simply because it didn't seem to be something that anybody else had thought of. But yeah, I was pleased to read that, because they are absolutely right. Of course, if you make it much more difficult for trans people to have legal jobs, what else are we going to do? Yeah,
and when I was going through the amicus briefs, I saw the name of this, and because I am a British trans woman who is living through an incredible amount of hate coming from TERFs, and it's been noticed, there's been a fair amount of articles out there in the world have just been like, why is Britain so transphobic right now?
Yeah.
We are becoming internationally known as a hotbed of transphobia, thanks to a certain amount of dickheads. But so when I saw
facilitated by their buddies in the press and the government, but let's talk about that another time.
Yeah, let's talk about that endlessly another time, which we absolutely will. So I saw that the brief was from 18 organisations that advocate for victims of sexual assault. I was just like, oh no, this could be just a whole bunch of TERFs, and it wasn't. Because, like Diana James said when we had her on, and like a lot of people we've talked to who have been in and around this stuff, the vast majority of shelters and refuges and people working in this area are very trans-inclusive because they see on the coalface that trans people need these services. Arguably, they are highly more likely to seek these services and need these services. And just like Diana James said on that episode when she was on, if a trans person is unable to get and maintain work, which this case could very much exacerbate, they are less likely to be able to escape a domestic abuse situation because they don't have the cash.
Yeah, the resources, the stability.
Yeah. So this does have far-reaching implications in so many areas that this episode could have easily been triple the length on this case, on these three cases. It so easily could have been. Like, this is the briefest cliff notes I could get to understand this situation in a relatively simple way. And obviously, you could go as deep into this as you want. I will provide as many links as possible in the description to show my workings of where this information came from. And you can go out and read it all yourself. And I thoroughly encourage you to go out and read as much as you can about this. But I would like to put out a massive fucking trigger warning on some of these amicus briefs because, you know, let's just say, like, Wolf weren't the worst ones I've read, and they were... It sounded like it could have been written by Posey Parker in places. Admittedly, a Posey Parker that knows how to write an essay.
Yeah, which, so clearly not the actual Posey Parker. But yes, indeed. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we've just dropped on you there. Hope it's all rather made sense. Obviously, as this goes along, we will continue to encourage people to donate money to the American Civil Liberties Union if you can. Spread the word about this if you're not able to. See if you can try and educate some of the people in your social circles. The decision on this is actually expected in early 2020, although the court proceedings, as we've mentioned, will be on October the 8th. And we will, of course, keep you updated on the developments as soon as we ourselves have read enough of the stuff to actually be able to understand them properly. Honestly, the things we do for you.
I will say, I absolutely loved researching this on a personal level because, well, I have this thing where I forget that the rest of the world exists. And so I was there reading amicus briefs, and I was reading about court decisions from the past and reading on the history of all these Supreme Court justices, and it was just tremendous fun. It reminded me of why I love doing this show, researching this specific thing, even though at points it was dark. And maybe I have a specific kind of brain malfunction that makes it easier for me to deal with reading about bastards being bastards. But yeah, I would thoroughly recommend it if you are feeling powerless to dive headfirst into topics like this if you have the spoons for it and assuming that your traumas are in check and all that stuff.
Don't do yourself a mischief, essentially.
But there is something to be said for going deep into an issue that there may be anxiety about. For example, I'm a bit scared that the world is turning against trans people, and looking at the States and what's going on with the Supreme Court, oh my God, we're all doomed. I definitely had that feeling going in, but when I started reading about it, I felt so much better because I learned that there was thousands of people, literally thousands of people working on this case in support of Amy Stevens and the other two cases, that they have thought of every angle. And yeah, I do have some hope that this will go okay because I now know that it isn't as simple as there are 5 conservative justices who will always go with the conservative line. That isn't the case at all. There is hope for this.
It's very true. It's very true. So let's hold on to that, shall we?
Yeah.
So just before we say goodbye, let's do our social media. We are on the Twitter at WhatTheTrans. We are on Facebook, Facebook.com/WhatTheTrans. And our website, whatthetranspod.tumblr.com. So if there's anything you think we should have covered, if there's anything you want to talk to us about, or if you just feel like having a bit of a natter, just do get in touch. We're always here.
One last thing. Obviously, again, me and Ashleigh are not legal scholars of American anything. We are basically two, I don't want to say amateur journalists at this point, but definitely DIY journalists, I think is the right term. Like, I did all this research in my bedroom. You know what I mean? So there is a chance we got things wrong. If we did, let us know. We will put in a correction. We now have a formalized way of dealing with corrections, which is something we arrogantly didn't think of before. So yeah, if we got something wrong, let us know and we will correct the record.
Lovely stuff. And other than that, we will see you next time. But hope you all have a super duper bye week, and we will speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.